Good evening, USA. Good morning, Asia and Europe. Welcome to the World Today discussion series organized by the UCLA Center for Global Management. Today's event is in partnership with the Easton Center of Technology Management. I'm Chris Tang, the Faculty Director of the Center for Global Management. It is a privilege for me to serve as a moderator to discuss the implications of generative AI development in the business world. Before I introduce our distinguished presenter, Terry Kramer, let me say a few words about today's topic. The term AI was coined in 1950 by the scientists, but they did not really pick up the momentum until OpenAI launched ChatGPT in late 2022. Within 6 months, ChatGPT took the world by storm. Over 100 million users. By June 2023, ChatGPT website generated 1.6 billion visitors. In 2023, thousands of AI tools and chatbots has been developed using LLM, large language model, machine learning, deep learning, etc. This is a new dawn of AI. McKinsey reported that 56% of the banks have been implemented AI technology. BBC reported that 90% of the news will be written by machines. Indeed, reporters from Business Insider, CNET, and CNBC have been using ChatGPT to write news stories. In the marketing world, according to Salesforce research, 84% of the marketers are already using AI. This development is both exciting and frightening. Then the question is, how will AI affect all of us in the near future? How should we prepare ourselves for the exponential growth of all these AI tools? More importantly, what are some of the issues we should be aware of? To answer these questions, it is my great honor to introduce our speaker, Terry Kramer. Terry is an adjunct professor and the faculty director of the UCLA Easton Center for Technology Management. First and foremost, he received his BA from UCLA.
Yeah, go Bruins.
And his MBA from the Harvard Business School. Terry has extensive technology and leadership expertise in the domestic and international telecommunications industry. He has held executive roles at AirTouch, PagBell, and Vodafone globally. At Vodafone, he has worked in London, The Hague, and various locations in the United States. In 2012, Terry was appointed by President Obama to serve as ambassador, head of the US delegations for the World Conference on International Telecommunications. This conference was broadcast by CNBC, New York Times, and Wall Street Journal. At the UCLA Anderson School, Terry is one of our star instructors. He's a recipient of the 2019 Citibank Teaching Award, as well as a FEMBA class teaching award as well. Now let me turn over to Terry Kramer. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. So it's a pleasure to be here with you. I want to start out and thank Chris and I want to thank Lucy. The partnership between the Easton Center, the Technology Management Center, and the Center for Global Management is a very tight partnership. And I don't think it's just happenstance. We obviously get along very, very well personally, but there's a lot of overlap in terms of technology-based innovation that you see across the world. And there are learnings from all over the world, as Lucy alluded to with the global immersions, thinking about how the context is unique, how that's driving different types of technology-based products, and how does that look different across the world and implications here. So a big thank you to them. It's great to see a bunch of familiar faces. I told a few people who are having drinks outside, I don't cold call in an event like this, so you can just sit and absorb. And for those of you that are new, this is part of my strategy. I don't scare you away from taking any of my classes. I hope you will join me. So listen, let me just start out and say that to me, the most transformational area of technology-based innovation that we have seen literally in the last 30 to 40 years is generative AI. I would have been scared saying that a few months ago, but seeing the rate of progress, seeing how broad the adoption is, seeing how fundamental the changes are, is allowing me to say that. And for those of you that have taken my classes, I'm very big on assessing things on rate times volume. Volume is the number of people that are affected. Rate is the impact per person. So in the case of generative AI, when you look at the applications today and how they're fundamentally affecting jobs of all types, and when you look at the number of industries and geographies that are affected, it's a huge market. So I'd like to just talk about it briefly, and then we're going to have a conversation from there. I always like to start technology conversations thinking about who are the constituents. In essence, where are the domains that you want to think about technology affecting? And the reason that these matter is these inform your view about technology, but there's also a dynamic relationship amongst them. So who are the three constituents? They're customers that now see different products and services that are software-based in many cases. And again, we'll talk about generative AI. They affect companies of all types. And by the way, as I'm going through this, these aren't all positive things. These are good and bad things. So many new companies are getting created. If you look at the latest valuation of OpenAI, $90 billion on their latest valuation. So there's a lot of excitement with certain companies. There are companies that are in the process of going away because they're getting disrupted, because there's all sorts of digital transformation challenges they're not addressing. Generative AI is going to be one of the many that affects companies. Third area is society. So in its best form, and we'll get into it, generative AI can create chatbots for healthcare, for education, a bunch of great applications. If you haven't listened to Sal Khan's latest TED Talk, he talks about Khanmigo. Khanmigo is basically the use of generative AI in the normal Khan Academy. It's a personalized tutor. So think about the improvement in performance and outcome and lower costs, broader accessibility. You have a bunch of examples like that that are going to change services to society. We also see a lot of concerns about the future of work. We see a lot of concerns about data privacy, et cetera. We'll go through all of these, but think about generative AI in these three categories and try not to think about things in a binary way. It is very easy in innovation, and by the way, in politics and everything else, people love to run to absolutes. And in my classes, for those of you who haven't taken them yet, it's a dangerous position to be in because generally there's a correlation between people that take very extreme views. Tech is all good, get out of its way. Tech is all bad, it's the end of our world. And a correlation with the lack of deep understanding about what the technology is and what it does. So I encourage you to get in the ring and think about what are the goods and bads, how do you get the best out of it. Before I talk specifically about generative AI, I just want to do a reminder. I do this at the beginning of all of my classes about what is the state of affairs of technology today. And I'll just briefly go over these here. But when you look at technology, the top left-hand box, we're seeing mature, broad-based, high-performing technologies. Fifth generation networks, 95% population availability of fifth generation networks today. In the US, in China, Europe is not far away, etc. We have cloud computing, companies like Azure and AWS. By the way, a factoid, now when you look at all the companies used to have their own data on their own data centers, we're now more than 50% are now housing their data in the public cloud. And so think about, on one side, that's a big progress that's been made. It also says the prospects of companies like AWS and Azure and Google Cloud and Alibaba Cloud, et cetera, et cetera. Internet of Things, 25 billion connected devices today, and it's growing to about 75 billion. So Fitbits, connected devices, cars of all types, appliances, buildings, et cetera. The most important area, though, is artificial intelligence. And it's no surprise these all go together. The amount of data that is being created is astronomical. When companies say they're on a digital transformation, it's not a buzzword. It is their desperate ability, in many cases, to survive by collecting data, assessing that data, creating new products and services, and insights that are highly accurate and predictive in nature. And so that's why artificial intelligence we're seeing in such a dominant way. Top right-hand side, value propositions. So people say, well, I like this technology, I don't like this. Fall back to what the value proposition is. This is from a customer standpoint, what are you offering them? The value propositions on most technology-based products are very, very attractive. I always like to bring up the example of autonomous vehicles. There's been billions spent. It is taking much longer than anybody ever thought. Acknowledge, acknowledge, acknowledge. It is probably one of the most transformational areas of innovation. It will take longer, but it is going to save people massive amounts of time. Do one market sizing on it. Look at the number of people that commute in Los Angeles, the amount of time they take a day, probably an hour and a half to 2 hours, times their hourly wage rate, and say you now are going to be freed up. You can shop, you can sleep in the car, you can do whatever you want, but think about what that use case is. We're seeing a whole bunch of these value propositions that are unbelievable in nature, saving cost, saving time, predictive capabilities in healthcare, et cetera. That is why capital is flowing into these areas. And as long as the capital is flowing in, you're going to have a lot of innovation happening. Bottom left-hand side, business models. This is the company side of the value proposition. Can companies make money in this area? We're seeing a whole bunch of examples of why companies are making money. The shared economy. You're taking single asset, Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, et cetera, and you're sharing that asset across lots of users. Drives down per unit costs, et cetera. Competing in an age of AI, we're going to talk about in a minute, but the main message is the digitization of companies is creating increasing returns to scale. And that's why a lot of companies are doing so well there. Now, with all of those relatively good things that I've said, on the public policy side, there's growing concern about the future of work, about data privacy, about antitrust. The number of lawsuits that have been brought, the pending regulation is probably never been greater than now. Eric Schmidt made an interesting comment. Basically, it's familiarity breeds contempt. Meaning now we experience all these tech products, we now know what we like and what we don't like. And it's amazing, coming out of COVID, most people would say technology was their best friend. It allowed them to have streaming solutions when they couldn't go to the movie theaters. It allowed for telehealth. It allowed, you may groan, but remote classes, and all of that was enabled during COVID. But coming out of COVID, now people are saying, well, now that it's everywhere, I don't like everything about it. So that is where things stand, and that is explaining why we're seeing so many areas of broad innovation and why there's more concern about the design of products and how they're working. A quick reminder of Clay Christensen's work at Harvard Business School. He should be one of your favorite professors in addition to Chris Tang. Remember, he wrote everything about disruptive innovation. These are a reminder of what happens to products and the related companies here when they're not able to adapt to a new environment. So if you think about the original digital camera, that is now that feature for 90% of the people is embedded in a smartphone. Not a need to have a standalone product. Think about the Garmin devices that were out years ago, $150, marginal navigation capability replaced by Google Maps. Same thing with Wikipedia against encyclopedias, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Why do I bring this up? Remember the lessons of history. All of you that are history majors, you don't want history to repeat yourself if you're in these businesses that have the threat of disruption. Now, let me get to the current stuff for tonight. There are three themes that have come out most recently that to me are the most informative, that explain generative AI, why it matters, and what's happening in the world. The first one is a book that was written called Competing in the Age of AI by Karim Lakhani and Marco Inciti. It came out a couple of years ago, and it's basically a foundational book. I'll tell you a little bit about the themes in a minute, but all about what does it mean now to compete now that there's AI and data in the industry. Second one is the economic potential of generative AI. This is from McKinsey. It just came out in June of this year. I encourage you to get the report. It's free, download it. It's like 60 pages long. I'll give you excerpts of it. It is a masterful summary of why it matters, where it's going to affect jobs, etc. Third area was an interview that was just done a couple of weeks ago of Karim Lakhani by the managing editor of the Harvard Business Review. And basically the title on all of this, and I'm going to steal my own thunder on this, but the title is AI won't replace humans, but humans will, with AI, will replace humans without AI. If I were ever to say there's a better statement about get in the ring and learn the stuff, that is a living example. Because what he's basically saying is we don't live in a world that the government blocks everything we're going to do with innovation. Other people are going to use it, companies are going to use it, nations are going to use it, and you've got to become competitive with it. Again, I'll talk more about that in a few minutes. So on the first theme, competing in an age of AI, what were the messages that came out there that are so relevant? They basically have said there's a new type of company that exists, and it's a digital-first company. These are companies here in the US like Google and Meta and Salesforce, etc. It's Alibaba and Tencent in China. There's a variety of companies. It's Reliance Jio in India. And these companies have been structured from day one as digital companies, collecting data, analyzing data, creating predictions, etc. And the argument in all of this is these are going to be the winners of the future. Notwithstanding antitrust lawsuits and a lot of other things, because fundamentally they're changing the dynamics of product service creation and competition, etc. There are four components of what they have in their companies. They fundamentally have got a way to collect data, to analyze that data, to experiment with it, etc. And what they're basically saying is many companies think they use data. They ain't seen nothing yet. They're scratching the surface on collecting and analyzing data. They're either highly siloed companies, and I'll talk about Moderna in a way that's kind of the new one, but they're highly siloed companies that are not able to collect data across the organization. They've got too much gut and judgment being used, and their accuracy rate, their prediction rate, their product performance rates are not as good as what the newer players. And what happens when these companies collide, the traditional ones with the digital-first companies, is the digital-first companies win almost every single time. So think about Amazon against traditional retailers and what's happened there. Think about the other disruptive players. I talked about Google Maps versus Garmin, etc. And the argument is in competing in an age of AI, there's increasing returns to scale. Not diminishing returns to scale, but increasing. Meaning as you get more and more data, your performance gets better. Think of Google search. It has gotten to 90% search relevance because of the amount of data and the insights that have come out of it. It's no surprise there's antitrust cases here. But the big challenge is the consumer benefiting or not? Because if you do believe the companies are sharing the goodness of the data and the insights with the consumer's done better. If they're taking all the money themselves, they're not doing good things. But that's basically the argument on competing in an age of AI. For those of you who've been in my class, the flagship kickoff case is on Moderna. And the argument in Moderna is this is a digital-first company. Now, the story hasn't played out everywhere, and I can always tell the people that from traditional pharma companies because they glare at me right now, but I'm at least going to give you the storyline. The author of this is Karim Lakhani, the same one I just mentioned. And basically what they said is this company has been set up digital-first, highly centralized, collecting data across all of their vaccines, not just COVID. They've got vaccines in cancer and cardiovascular disease, etc. And they came to market rapidly with lower cost, and they came to the market with better performance. That is a disruption pending. Now, you could say Pfizer did the same thing. They came out quickly. The key question is what happens from here? And the argument is, if you set up a platform like Moderna has to collect data and analyze it, you've got a better position to be in than a lot of traditional players. Let me just show you now what's the landscape look like in terms of companies and their market cap. What you'll see here is a ranking of companies by market cap. You'll see the countries that they're from, and this compares 1989 to 2021. For those of you who have been in my class, I'm very big on the so whats. So what does this data tell you? Anybody want to hazard a quick guess? Yeah.
89 was a hardware revolution, whereas 2000s was a software revolution.
Yes, so we have a lot of software, digital technology companies in 2021. Big change. You see a lot of banks on the left. You see a lot of tech companies on the right. What do you see in terms of geography? You're seeing the US and China now showing up in almost all of the cases, right? So we're going to get into the McKinsey work in a minute, but they also wrote a piece on superstar nations, superstar companies, superstar people. It's not a kind of reference and title, but their message is there's an aggregation of a lot of capabilities in certain areas. And that's going to create a worry about division, but it's a very important thing to say, what does it take to be successful here? So now let me get into ChatGPT and generative AI. Again, one of the most transformational areas. This is a Coursera review of just what is GPT, teaching a computer to recognize patterns and make decisions based on input. What we're seeing now with generative AI especially is the ability not only to analyze large disparate amounts of data, but the ability to interact, to create content, create conversation, the ability to interact, as opposed to being a one type of capability, limited interaction capability, we're now seeing this ability to work across functions. And so you're seeing some examples, and again, I'll talk about them in more detail here, but it can generate human-like text. It can generate a response to a prompt. Think about email and the ability to have an automated way of dealing with your email and how much time could be freed up there. Generating text in multiple languages. Talk about globalization of products and services, avatars and other things, media and content that have been clunky when you have translation of language. You have a lot of that dealt with. What are some of the problems? We'll get into it in more detail. It doesn't always understand what it's saying. So you're going to get what's called hallucinations. You're going to get stuff that either doesn't make sense, it's been made up, it's irrational, etc. But keep your eye on change in performance. People tend to have a static view. If you look at the last 6 months in terms of the relevance of outcome and the incidence of hallucination, the performance has gotten unbelievably better. GPT-3 to GPT-4 has really kind of shown a lot of changes. So the report, this kind of second piece, which is this report about the economic potential of generative AI from McKinsey. Fascinating piece here. So it first says it can impact and create an increase of all AI by 15 to 40%. And let me just underscore here, AI is not some tiny nothing market. If you're saying this market that is already gigantic is going to grow by 15 to 40%, you know there's a lot of big stuff happening here. $4.4 trillion. They then said, where are we going to see the use of generative AI the most? Now, this doesn't say it's not affecting all the other areas. They're just trying to use an 80-20 rule to say where's it going to be most dominant. They identified 4 job types and they identified 3 industry sectors. And these are important to kind of assess why are they identifying these and what are the implications. The 4 areas are customer operations, number 2, marketing and sales, 3rd area, software engineering, and 4th area, R&D. So what is the joke? It's kind of a sadistic joke. All the software engineers that 2-3 years ago were developing capabilities to automate blue-collar jobs, factory jobs, truck driving jobs, etc. Now the AI is coming after them because their jobs can be automated. So 4 areas that are job-wise. What are the sectors that are viewed as going to have the biggest impact? Banking. And a lot of this, again, is rate times volume. They're looking at the number of jobs that can be automated, and they're looking at how much money people make in each of those jobs. Banks have huge call center operations and often fairly highly skilled people when you're dealing with asset management and other activities. High tech, another area that's going to be impacted. Lots of jobs now. It's a big part of our economy, and lots of high-paid people. And so that's likely to be the second area. 3rd area, life sciences. Same argument, magnitude and value per person. Potential to automate work, 60 to 70% of employees' time. Now, this is going to get into an interesting discussion. Is that good or bad? So it's a good thing that it frees people up to do a lot of things. I worry. I always ask people when they say it's all good, and technology, people love to be positive about everything. But I always say, can you please give me the debits and credits here? Tell me what jobs are going to get created and tell me what jobs are going to go away. There's certainly a lot of benefits if there are labor shortages to have an automated capability. But where you have people that can't easily be retrained, where there's no job to go to, and then we're going to get into geography, about people that are in the wrong physical location in relation to where the jobs are getting created. It's significant. So those are some of the big issues. IP, privacy, security, explainability, all of those are concerns. I was mentioning to Chris during before we started about all of the kind of discussions and lawyers that are focusing on IP infringement, which is a very important issue. But remember, as the systems are taking in information, they're taking in information from a variety of sources, AI, and then creating a product. It can be media and entertainment, it can be a diagnosis, etc. It's not one place. So how you adjudicate this stuff to me is not 100% clear, but you are going to have a lot of people saying my stuff has been taken, and that'll have to be a big area of focus. So what are some of the actual examples in the McKinsey report? Customer operations. So on the left-hand side here, what you'll see is in customer operations, more and more people will be able to have an automated experience, right? So think of Conmigo at the Khan Academy. It's the same idea with a call center. I always ask my students, would you rather call the United Airlines call center, or would you rather do the transaction over the United Airlines mobile app? And 99% of them say the mobile app. They like the speed, they feel the accuracy is better, a million other things. Well, think about that times 100 or 1,000. People's attitudes about really being able to deal with things on a fully automated basis. Now, if you want human in the loop, there's a couple of references here. Customer agent interaction. So human agent uses AI developed call scripts. It's an interesting twist here, right? Because the machine is now instructing the human about what to say and how to deal with certain things. So as that capability gets greater, it will affect quite a bit. Agent self-improvement. So the machine will start giving feedback to the person, right? And how the person can get better. By the way, if you're trying to get the so what and the interesting issues here, the capability of the machine is rising. If the human capability does not rise, you're going to have an eclipsing of people. That's worrisome, and that's the imperative. And it's imperative for all of you in business and in leadership to be good at your game, because the water level is rising. Marketing and sales, similar experience. You have human in the loop on the strategization. So what are you trying to do in the marketplace? How much are you trying to grow? What type of segments, etc. But then much of the other elements, awareness, consideration, conversion, retention, can be done in an automated way. Our son used to work in inside sales at LinkedIn. They got rid of the whole group. It was not necessary to have humans doing that. He ended up with a great job, so none of you need to worry. But it was an interesting commentary about what has happened with a lot of these tasks. Software engineering, same story, top left, inception and planning. You'd have human in the loop to think about what you're trying to achieve and what are ideal outcomes, but then system design, testing, coding, maintenance, all of that can be automated. Big changes from the past. Same thing with R&D, product creation, early research, again, human in the loop, but design, test planning, etc., simulations. If all of these don't seem worrisome enough, and they should be worrisome or great, depending on your perspective, remember the rate of improvement is notable. So if I were to come back in 6 months and show what are the capabilities, it's going to be a lot better. So an interesting set of challenges. So last section I just want to cover here. As I mentioned, Kareem Lakhani was interviewed by the Harvard Business Review. Fascinating discussion. And again, remember the title, AI won't replace humans, but humans with AI will replace those without. Why do I want to underscore that point? Because I think it's a masterful statement. If you go back to the principles of disruptive innovation, What happens when companies in established businesses, and by the way, it's the same thing with individuals, they're in a good place to begin with, they see something going on that suggests a disruption is there, and what do the disruptors love? They love when the established companies dither. They love when the established companies dismiss. They love when the established companies argue about stuff, because all of that is buying time for the disruptor, in this case, generative AI and other things, to plant the flag and then move into the market. So his message here is be careful sitting on the sidelines and criticizing. That doesn't say there aren't important things that need to be managed from a product design, data transparency, et cetera. But to say, hey, listen, I don't like this and it's dystopian, et cetera, is not a good place to be, because generally what goes on with the human mind is they shut things out then, and you're not learning, et cetera. So what were several of the specific things he said? Digital economy is growing notably. Change in composition of top companies. So that slide that I showed you a minute ago. Supply and demand changes with AI. What are those? The cost to innovate has plummeted. And he looked at the iPhone App Store and said, what would it have been to distribute an app of the old days versus now? Digital costs go to almost zero. There's almost zero incremental costs with a digital transaction, sales, service, et cetera. And that's what he's saying here. The cost of cognition has fallen, right? So assessing, predicting, et cetera. Remember again, disruptive innovation, low cost, often low feature, and then gets a position and moves up market. What they're suggesting here is that disruption will happen with cognition. Demand has surged. People like data-oriented recommendations, diagnostic tools, et cetera, et cetera. Generative AI is the newest way for interacting. You know, one of the most interesting companies to see what they do with this is, to me, is Microsoft. You know, Microsoft with a co-pilot capability with all of their software for the enterprise and how it could change how people do their work and their email and analysis using Word, analysis doing Excel. It'll be fascinating. It is not a surprise they've invested $10 billion in OpenAI. Below average, they did a study, below average human performers improved 43% when they used generative AI versus 17% for those that were viewed as top performers. Now, the other angle on this is the people that are not good at what they do are going to get passed up quicker by the AI. And it's a fascinating study. They looked at radiologists. You look at radiologists, I hope there's no radiologists in the room, but they basically say the ability, the image recognition has gotten so good that now the 50th percentile of radiologists in terms of speed and accuracy of rating an X-ray has now been performed by a machine. And again, remember the improvement that's going up. So you want to be thinking about, you know, are your capabilities rising? A lot of this, by the way, is saying, learn how this is used. Find the right tasks that you can automate yourself. I always say in my tech management class, the team project, use ChatGPT and generative AI to do the market sizing. I'm sorry to all the marketing professors. Market sizing and your DCF models. That stuff can be automated. Excuse all the, I've upset half of the faculty now. Make sure you use your own mind to think about how, where, and why innovation is going to happen. That's very complex. Think about adoption. How complex it is to figure out, will a customer adopt or not? How do you get an organization to adopt digital transformations? Use your time on that because the water level is rising. I've had Arun Rao speak. He teaches our product management delivery class. He has a clever slide that shows water and then land like hills. And he shows over time how the water level is rising. The people are the land, the technology is the water. So you want to make sure you keep moving to firm ground, and that work can be a lot more interesting, but you need to kind of make that move. Implications of AI and generative AI, several things. Prediction, and that's been done for the last few years. It's been getting better and better. Second one is interaction. So now with generative AI, you can communicate back and forth. And think about a Google search now with Bard versus a regular search. Now you kind of get the answer and you can go into multiple queries. Creation, this is what's upsetting and worrying the media and entertainment industry. Marketing of all types. Salesforce is generating marketing campaigns for their customers. early stage stuff on their CRM platform. Globalization, so when you need to translate product service capability in a different language, it's never been made easier. Enhanced productivity for individuals, enterprises, and society. Basically, the forecast is over 1.5% GDP growth due to generative AI for most of the countries that really adopt and use it well. The biggest risk, to me, my own view, is the disparity issue. That is the most worrisome area. And the disparity issue is going to exist for companies, right? Companies that do well or not, but it's going to happen for society. It's going to go down to the individual level, people that are not familiar with how to use this, so the gap becomes wider, the number of jobs that go away, the lack of retraining, the lack of new roles that gets created. There's a whole bunch of things there that are going to happen. So that to me is the biggest worry. And Karim Lakhani used the quote here from William Gibson, the author, "The future is here, it's just not evenly distributed yet." So that to me would be the number one thing to think about. Let me just close and then we're going to have a conversation. If I were to give you one piece of advice, it's 1.5, I always extend it a little bit, is get in the ring on this stuff and learn it. Understand how it gets used, how it can change work. Are you getting better in the process of all this? Are you an influencer in your companies? Because leadership, you want to be somebody that is really using this for good, that creates not only competitive advantage, but someone that can help workers, help society, etc. Do not hang back on this stuff. I see too many people, they love to kind of get into this, it's the end of the world, and that's fine, identifying issues. But use all that energy to focus on how would you design the product better, how would you think about job retraining, as opposed to just saying this stuff is all bad. I just think that'll create the biggest risk. So with that upbeat or scary thing, I will stop, and Chris and I, we're going to have a conversation.
Truly fantastic, and I have created a whole list of questions, but of course there's not enough time.
Yeah.
So let me cut to some more important issues that you raised earlier. The tools, the generative AI can do many things. And then this reminds me of the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century, when you have automation, the machinery that replace humans. So now there are all these AI tools, they improve the productivity.
Yep.
Therefore, we don't need that many even white collars to do the job. Then the question is are there any white collar jobs that AIs are not good at so that we can focus on?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting one. And by the way, to make it even more kind of worrisome about the thing, the Industrial Revolution to me was not as multi-sectored as these changes. This is almost every industry, every company. So people talk about the agricultural revolution, we made it through fine. That's one narrow sector compared to everything that's out there. So what can it not do today? Now remember, it's moving up market. A lot of the complex judgment-related issues. If you were to ask them, and I think about this in my own class, trying to understand the product itself, is it something that people will use and adopt? You have to have a pretty advanced set of thinking. All of you remember what the framework is we do to assess adoption of products? Rogers 5 factors, right? So Rogers 5 factors, you need to look at relative advantage. You need to look at compatibility values, or people's values being changed. You need to look at complexity of product. You need to look at trialability. That ability to assess will people adopt, I think is a tough one now for generative AI to do. Inside the enterprise, thinking about the organization, et cetera, all the traditional industries that have to go on a digital transformation, that is not going to be something that generative AI is going to do. So a lot of these complex leadership issues, kind of adoption issues, human psychology issues is there. Media and entertainment, I'm mixed. I think some of the brand new stuff, it's not going to be able to do. But if you have a continuation of things, you're in a series, a TV series, a Netflix series, it's going to get easier, I think, for them to think about genre and what to cover.
Well, thank you. I think this reminds me of a study that conducted by BCG. So they have two groups, A/B testing. The one group of the consultants, they used ChatGPT, the other group did not use. So depending on the task, they were assigned to do that. So if the task requires more analytical thinking, more analysis. So in my class, I also encourage the students to use GPT, but I want them, your analysis at best, you can get half the point because it requires you go deeper into the market situations, in terms of your customer base, in terms of customer segmentation. So in that case, unless you write the right prompt, the generative AI cannot analyze the case for you. So that's what BCG actually discovered. So actually, for those who actually require, they call the external frontier of kind of work, that's the AI cannot do that yet. So in the case, there's still hope. Now, let me go to the next one. So far, you've been really supportive of this kind of development. It's a more utopian setting. So let me ask you then, is there any dystopian scenarios that you can share with us in addition to disparity?
Yep. So let me identify where the worries are, but I would take exception to this being utopian. It's a nuanced thing, but my message is there's a lot of innovation potential here. There's a lot of opportunity for new companies and creation, and you need to get into that ring. Because often what happens, I went to my 32nd business school reunion, and there was a panel discussion on the metaverse in government. And I thought, I don't know if I want to go to the government part, but I want to hear about the metaverse, et cetera. The reaction, most of the people were my age. A third of the people, complete shutdown. This is the government taking over. This is dystopian, et cetera. And I would have loved to have had a bunch of psychologists in the room to see how much they were listening once they declared themselves. But this happens in our economy, by the way, in our politics. You know, people get very severe on, they're not kind of processing anymore because they're just looking for whatever it is they want to get. So basically, you had a third of the people said, I hate this thing, I don't want it. A third of the people you could be convinced. And then a third of the people saying, hey, there's some promise here. Let's think about how it influences innovation. So I don't call that utopian because utopian to me implies, you know, everything is great and this is our salvation, et cetera. Where are the risks here? There's several risks. Rank order, the future of work. I'm very worried about loss of jobs. People will say, you know, people are going to get more productive and new jobs are going to get created. Just do the time and motion study. At some point, there's a fixed amount of demand for whatever the product and service is. Radiologists doing x-rays. Are you going to do 50% more x-rays now that you've got more productivity? Probably not. So those areas I worry about the most. You also have the ability of somebody getting bad information and using it for bad purposes. Right? So most recently, Eric Schmidt has talked about somebody that could find out how to make a bomb. And it gets in the wrong hands, and all of a sudden you got a big issue there. So I worry about that significantly. I worry about early on, and what you talked about with students and all that, people can end up not validating the information they get. And so it's garbage in, garbage out. I've been using generative AI as I update my tech management class, the courses, the cases and all that. Super helpful. 50% was helpful, but it identified, you know, I said, what cases in this topic? Well, half of the cases I identified don't exist. I went into Harvard Business Publishing, they aren't there. And I thought, well, maybe there's some other source. No, it's not there. So you have to still use good judgment to be able to evaluate what's there and what's appropriate. That I worry about.
Wow, that is a very good point. Earlier on, you talked about in terms of in the future, the companies that collect the largest amount of data will be the winner. So then, in this case, probably would be Google.
Yeah.
But then we'll actually put other new company in a very disadvantaged position. That's my one concern. The other one is that there are bad actors around this world. And it actually is very easy to generate fake information or very harmful information on the public space. And the generative AI cannot distinguish which one is true, which one is not true, because it's pretending words. So in that case, that would actually create a lot of bad information that could lead to bad actions. So as a society, what should we do about that?
Yeah, so this gets into, I don't want to get into an overt political discussion. I do think there are two things. One is companies and industries have to self-police more. If they do not, especially technology companies, get careful, they will be punished. It used to be that Europe was kind of the leader in suing companies and antitrust and everything else. Then China, about 2 years ago, went very aggressive against their tech companies and said, you're not serving society here, you're serving yourselves, et cetera. They went aggressive. Follow the Federal Trade Commission here now in the US. There's record numbers of cases coming out. So first message is, be a good corporate citizen. Because if you don't, you're going to get regulation dealt with you. This is why I don't like when people say, bring on the regulation. Some of these people, it's disingenuous. Because most regulation that gets brought on is not the type you're going to want. Most people in a regulatory environment can't know every domain, every product. There's got to be a confidence that companies and leaders, as all of you are going to do good things. You're not going to harm society while you're making a profit. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I think there are going to need to be some guardrails put up. Mm-hmm. And I kind of think about it, the FAA, when you fly. If you had one bad airline that had complete disregard for public safety, and God forbid there's a crash, you would kill the whole air travel industry. There's going to have to be some very basic things. It remind me when I was at Vodafone and we'd look at an agreement, being a non-lawyer, our lawyers would often say, listen, just look for two things: willful misconduct and negligence. If somebody is willfully doing something bad, or there's negligence, they should have really known something, that's harmful. Make sure that people aren't doing that. So that's where I think we're going to see more regulation, but I am not a big believer that regulation is the answer. I think it's a bit of a punt, because I think people don't know what can and cannot be regulated. And the last point, this is when you're going to start saying it's utopian, but it's more just positive, I'd use the term, is many of these innovations are going to create a lot of good, even though there's some problems. So I always bring up the example of autonomous vehicles. People look at an accident that occurs. There's just one in San Francisco with cruise automation. Terrible. It needs to get fixed. They need to modify. 40,000 deaths a year in the US caused by human-caused accidents. So every day you're delaying, you're causing harm to the population. So somebody has to kind of look at the trade-off. We tend to be absolutist, and we're very individualistic in the US. This is why markets, I think, like China are going to eclipse the US, because they're going to look, I think, a little more broadly and say this net is going to create more gain for society. Now, I'm not suggesting be binary. Don't care about people that get in an accident, but be careful getting too harsh, because you're slowing down safety, you're hurting healthcare as we know it. Think about Conmigo and education. Think about all the people that can't afford to come to Los Angeles and go to a highfalutin university that costs a lot of money. Every minute that you push that aside, you have a lot of people that are being denied some service. This is an example. I said, why get in the ring on this stuff and look at the trade-offs. It's too easy to get, it's all good or all bad.
I agree. But this one is based on the assumption that majority are good people. Now, right now, a lot of AI tools, you have a safeguards by human to override the system. But we are still in the era of narrow intelligence. So that means that generative AI is utilizing what is already exists out there to generate additional content. But the next wave is with what we call a general audience, a general intelligence that will pass the Turing test. It's like thing like a human.
Yeah.
But the next step is actually is machine consciousness. That means the machine can actually think, can analyze like a human. Now, once they take over, the human can no longer can distinguish. There could be good machines and bad machines. Then in the case, it's out of our control. Now, in 2014, a Cambridge professor, Stephen Hawking, has this concern.
Yeah.
Once you reach to this kind of super intelligence, if we have no control of how the machine thinks, that would be the Space Odyssey 2001. Do you remember the computer's name? HAL 9000, right? So in the case that we need to think about, starting thinking about how we can actually prevent this kind of disaster to happen. So what should we do about that?
Yes, so I don't 100% agree. Let me tell you where the distinguishing point. Superintelligence, remember there's going to come a time when the machine's going to be better at processing what we can do as humans. Google, by the way, is doing a lot of work right now on basically like a search engine for healthcare. So I got in the worst argument when we were in New York visiting friends with a married couple. They're both in healthcare. We got on the topic of diagnosis. And they basically said, you're always going to want a doctor to diagnose you. And I said, I'm sorry, Barbara was her name. I said, I'm sorry, but I want the best diagnosis. I want measured on diagnostic accuracy, God forbid if I'm not well. And if that's the machine, then so be it. Obviously, she erupted. My wife yelled at me never to get in conversations like this at night. But the point is that if you've got better performance of the machine than the human, are you categorically sure you don't want to take the machine's recommendations? I think what you're saying is you want to understand how the machine works, what data it's taking in, how the algorithms work. You want to have some sort of testing on it. But I am not a believer that in all cases the human should be in there. We just switched doctors because my last one, I don't think she really thought through the issues well. And so the next one's better. But I look at what's happening. We're going to have, by the way, next week, Tech and Society, October 27th, we're going to have the general manager of Amazon Clinic. And the corporate people have already limited all the things we can say and not, but all I'm going to say, when you guys listen to what he has to say, they're creating a platform matching healthcare providers and patients. Ask yourself what the chess game is for Amazon. Because if they're able to do in healthcare what they've done in all the other areas, they're going to lower cost, they're going to improve availability, and they're ultimately going to start looking at performance outcomes. And when they're able to do that, healthcare gets better. And we have 30 million people in the US that don't have insurance, they can't afford it. When you ask anybody in the rest of the world, they say it's egregious how much it costs. Education, by the way, is the same thing. So I'm a believer that if you use this stuff right, we can improve a lot. You just have to have these guardrails.
Fully agree. I hope that in terms of diagnostic analysis also come with the human touch. Maybe this is the AI touch that can each actually understand the human emotions and with empathy. That's
so can I give you another? This is point counterpoint. If you remember, this is a good debate. So one of my students just sent me, he said, you need to use Pi. P-I? How many of you used it, by the way? You should try. It's an app. Basically, it's the human touch of generative AI. Download the app. It's more oriented like, how are you feeling? You know, are you upset? Are you worried? Blah, 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 blah. I asked the student that sent it to me, I said, what's your impression of this? I tried it out. He likes it more than talking to a human. Number one, he feels that there's too many people, therapists and others, that have got their own bias about what is going on, concerned about privacy issues, and actually said he felt it's a safer environment. Now, I'm not yet in that place, but I thought, wow, what a commentary. And if this is indicative of where society is, your age, all of you, adoption, we're going to see broad adoption in therapists.
Well, I can see in the future, I just use the avatar to teach a class and they collect the money. That sounds good. All right, in view of time, I'm going to open up to the floor. So I'm going to invite you to go to the mic.
I wanted to see if you can touch on possibly AI and defense applications.
Yeah, so the ability, I mean, this goes back to companies like Palantir, the ability to use AI to predict what's going to happen. A lot of, like my time in the State Department was fascination with what our intelligence organizations and defense organizations do to do scenario planning. To be able to say, what could go wrong here? How does it create a national security risk, et cetera? I think there's a bunch of things that could happen there that could better predict where the risk is. How do you play the simulation on what happens and what might the reaction be, et cetera? You also can see it in cybersecurity. You know, President Obama, before he left, he was asked in an interview, what's your biggest concern, a threat to the United States? It was cyber attacks. That was the number one issue. He said, if somebody were to breach our infrastructure, our military, our stock exchange, all of that would create havoc. The ability to identify when intrusions might occur would be another one. But remember, this is a battle, right? So we're only as good as how much better we are than somebody else. And so if we hang back too far on this, we could find other nations better equipped. And so those are the applications I would see that are most interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So this is a collaboration between Easton and the Global Management Center. I have a question on the global dynamics caused by generative AI. With the internet, you see a lot of globalization, open communication across different countries. Do you see a dynamic change with generative AI as well? Specifically, I wonder if the rate of development in developing countries could be sped up by generative AI.
Yes, it could. I worry that I think the gap is going to widen. I think China, right now, the US is ahead, I think, on most of the AI related, but China's rate of improvement is going to get notable. There are more restrictions now on the use of generative AI and ChatGPT equivalents in China than there is here. And so if it stays curtailed a lot, you'll find slower development there. But eventually, like a lot of things in the last 5-10 years, China's going to advance. I worry about Europe. Europe has been very good in looking at regulation, but it's not creating the same number of technology companies per capita as the US and China are. And then the other nations, you need in general, I mean, this is kind of the competing in an age of AI, generally you need large domestic markets, right? Because you need large data sets. You need to have a fairly contiguous kind of view about what customers are willing to share and adopt, et cetera, that creates that adoption. And then you use that to expand. This is why China has made so much improvement, is huge domestic market, willingness to use data by a lot of young people, et cetera. So I think you'll see China really advance, and I think the US will already be there. I don't know about the rest of the world. It may take a while.
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that. I think in particular in China, actually they're leading in certain aspect of AI. This is a surveillance for good reasons. So because I think that they collect the data on individuals, there's not that much individual data privacy. But now it's changing. Now even the Chinese governments recognize that there should be some form of data protection for the individuals. So I think that depending on how much the consumers willing to share the data. As Terry pointed out, in Europe, they're very concerned about individual protection. So therefore, the data privacy protection is really hinder the development of all this kind of AI development because you need massive data to actually have better information. So I think that there is a trade-off.
Yep.
How much are you, the public, willing to give up so they can support the public goods for everyone versus you protect yourself, but then will hinder the development. So there is a trade-off. But I think that right now even US is trying to walk a balanced line.
Yeah,
yes.
It is. And India is a market you should watch for the next period. Because with Reliance Jio, they're a big wireless operator there. The investments they've gotten, the convergence of their offerings, et cetera, they're going to be one to watch.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question here from a remote participant. What are some of the mitigation strategies that can be used to address the societal and public policy issues?
Yep. Quite a few things. So the first thing is to think about if you're in a technology-oriented business with a product, et cetera, think about what are you trying to achieve with the end market. A lot of times, this is the good and the bad. Technology companies tend to be highly iterative. They try something, see what happens. It's like a mobile app, et cetera. The problem is harm can occur when you're not thoughtful about it. So you want to think about who is the end user? What am I trying to create? Better predictive accuracy on something, lower cost, whatever, and make sure you're designing the product around that. Where can harm occur, Lucy, is you look at recruiting as an example. Automated recruiting solutions, you can say on one level, it's the autonomous vehicle thing, you have massive bias when people hire people on a human basis. By the way, I see this when I sit on boards and people from Stanford, Harvard, even UCLA, they kind of like, they use this kind of badge of honor, like, well, they went to UCLA, thus they might be great. You know, it ends up being a form of bias as opposed to looking at people's results and what they achieved in their jobs, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to think about, first of all, can you eliminate the most heinous forms of bias that occur, and then get to the next level and say, what is the ideal state that you want to get to? And so companies that are looking at representative data sets, they're testing the outcomes before releasing something. That to me is an excellent thing to do. What would be a second thing to do? Job retraining. The larger tech companies have more of an ability to retrain a workforce and help their customers. Amazon tries to do this through AWS, but their ability to train people in a digital world, I think, is another one that is huge. Those are two examples of what matter. And if you look at companies like Google, I would give them actually, compared to the other tech companies, some of the best marks, that they're super thoughtful. Theory is that's why Bard is delayed compared to ChatGPT, as they were being very cautious about what was going to get generated with Bard. So there are companies, I think, that are trying to do it, but you got to believe it from the top. You can't be dismissive and just say, yep, I'm checking a box here, but I believe it.
Professor Kramer, you mentioned a couple of minutes ago that you expect companies to build their own large language models because a lot of ChatGPT is built on public domains. How do you see this progressing as companies start to use large language models? Where do you see an intermediate step where there are cobots, maybe where there are humans that are monitoring the performance of ChatGPT within their own enterprise, and how do you see that progressing?
Yeah, so to me, the metric would be here. Every time you call a telecom company and they force you into this chat or this digital interaction, and you want to measure, we used to measure like what's the call completion rate or problem resolution rate. You need to get to a point where it's 30, 40, 50%. It's probably at 2% right now or 5%. What's going to happen, I think, over time is that chatbot or discussion that you're going to have is going to get more and more intelligent. It's going to know who you are, what price plan you're on, what you're happy with, what you're not happy with, what the company offers, and you're going to find better interaction there. And it'll get to be the United Airlines mobile app, that people prefer that over calling the call center. That's where I think it's going to happen, but it's going to be within an enterprise. Because remember, again, the data on most companies is not on the public internet, or it shouldn't be on the public internet. This is, by the way, one of the reasons why UCLA is worried about, getting into all of this is all the research, important research, could all of a sudden be, shared everywhere, and then all the kind of secret sauce goes away from the school. Does that answer it?
Yeah, thank you.
Good.
I'm wondering if you could share some experience and your insights on how you manage change in organizations due to the generative AI.
Yeah, and maybe what I'll do is I'll broaden it because a lot of technology and digital transformations require change-related work. And usually people are very, very resistant. So when I told you about my reunion, all the reactions people had, that's how I kind of think about what the issue is. So to me, the first thing is leaders have to be able to paint a picture of how they see the world around them. Many, many times people go in initially and they say, this is what we should go do. Matter of fact, at Vodafone, it used to happen when I headed strategy, we have people want to get in and say, we need to get into this market, we need to offer this product, and they get this negative visceral reaction because people don't know where you've come from. It's a non sequitur. The really good leaders are saying, let's look at what's going on with technology. Let's look at consumers. The fact my student wanted to do an automated, mental health solution and not a human. It's look at whatever the trends are and what are the implications for the business. And let the organization digest that a bit. Because if you can get them to agree to context, the recommendation, it's like my case analysis in my class, the recommendation is self-evident. But when people don't agree on the context is when you get 18 different actions. So that's the first thing they need to do. The second thing is you've got to be able to say, okay, what's the path you need to take? So good leaders don't just leave things completely up in the air. They say, here are the 3 priorities. This is how we're going to measure success. They walk the talk on it. They fund these things. They don't starve the effort, etc. And they use that as a way of saying, this is our direction. When you have people that don't want to support something, we used to do this at Vodafone all the time. We had country operations and nobody ever agreed. They thought they were all unique. You'd find one of the biggest opponents and you put them in charge of the effort. You tell them what the goal is and what they're trying to achieve, and all of a sudden they slowly get religion about what needs to happen. But you have to do that, and when their colleagues see them adopting, they start saying, well, maybe I should do that. Another effort you do is once you're getting early success, give it oxygen. Acknowledge that person, that market, that product, etc., and make it clear the train is leaving the station. And kudos to the following 3 people that made that happen. It creates a momentum in the organization. And just like anything in people and psychology, you got to give people a little bit of time. So understand people go through change at different rates. What I would say is unacceptable is people can't take their marbles and go home. They can't say, I hate this stuff and I'm opting out. Then you say the organization is being hurt by what you're doing. That would be the ground rule that I would suggest.
That's extremely helpful. Thank you.
Good, you bet.
Wow, Terry, this is truly wonderful. So let me just summarize what we learned from you. Wow, this cannot be summarized in a short moment, but let me try.
Okay.
So let me go back to your original first slide. In terms of trying to understand all these issues, there are 3 elements you need to focus on.
Yep.
Consumers, enterprises, and society. I want to prove to you I was paying attention.
Good job. You're off to a good start.
From the consumer standpoint, the generative AI is actually proven, is actually creating value in terms of cost and speed and accuracy. It's really there. The second one, from the enterprise standpoint, it is good, but on the other hand, they need to manage the human aspect of it. How to go through the chasm to actually adopt this AI in a more productive manner. At the same time, they need to be aware of the biases they may create. So for example, for healthcare diagnostics analysis, the symptoms for female getting a heart attack is very different from men. They're different symptoms. So therefore, the system needs to recognize there are some differences. And then from the society standpoint, from the government standpoint, they also need to be aware of the disparity, the have versus have not. Because during the COVID, we noticed a lot of people who are social, the economic class, they cannot afford to have a high-speed internet. So in the case, really put them in the disadvantage. To make the entire society to move forward, maybe we need to have some kind of level playing field such that everyone can actually lift the society so that we can embrace the new era as well. So on this note, this is a wonderful time to end this evening's sessions. So I want to thank you for sharing your wisdom and insights with us. And also I want to thank the audience, the in-person audience, and also the online audience. And I want to thank you for all of you for the privilege of your time. Thank you.
Good job. Thank you, Chris. It was great. Good job.